Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're really going deep. We're plunging into the incredible and sometimes confusing story of the Amorites. We've got a fantastic stack of research here, and we're going to pull out the most compelling insights for you.
It's a great topic because, you hear the name Amorites echoing through ancient history.
Yeah.
They shaped kingdoms, influenced laws.
Exactly. They were major players.
Yeah.
But their actual identity, it's remained weirdly elusive, hasn't it?
It really has, shifting between these, celebrated founders of dynasties and then almost dismissed as, what was the phrase, barbarous mountaineers.
Right. It's this huge paradox. You think of empire builders, Romans, Persians maybe, but the Amorites, they were right up there in the Bronze Age.
Absolutely formidable. Their reach was huge. Babylon, Syria, even influencing Egypt with the Hyksos connection.
But that puzzle remains. How could they be so powerful, so widespread, yet so hard to pin down historically? Sometimes they feel almost invisible, despite being everywhere.
It is like trying to grasp smoke, as you said earlier.
So that's our mission today. We're going on a journey of discovery, really challenging those old assumptions. We want to try and unveil a much more complex, incredibly adaptable civilization that genuinely transformed the Bronze Age.
We'll trace them from their, semi-nomadic roots on the Syrian steppe.
All the way to becoming these dominant political forces. Aaron Burke's work is key here, showing that reach from Babylon to Yamḥad, and as you mentioned, even the Nile Delta.
And the core idea we'll explore, the central argument really, is that their success wasn't just about swords and shields.
No, not just conquest. It was something more sophisticated, this amazing ability to turn mobility, their nomadic background, into actual power.
Right, and adapting institutions from others, but making them their own, creating this huge interconnected cultural zone.
And guiding us will be, modern scholars like Aaron Burke and also Rian Stabauer. Their work has really shifted the ground, moving us way beyond those earlier, maybe simpler views you find in, say, George Barton's work from the 1920s.
Definitely. It's a much richer picture now.
So, get ready for a deep dive. We're going to explore the enigmatic but truly lasting legacy of the Amorites.
Let's start with how their story used to be told, because that context is important.
Okay, let's unpack that. For a long time, the narrative about the Amorites was seen through this very specific, and you said it, probably biased lens.
Very much so. If you look at early 20th century stuff, like George Barton's 1925 work.
He really paints them as these uncivilized intruders, doesn't he? Like mountaineers, the desert over the Somme, that kind of imagery.
Exactly. The idea was their history only really mattered once they bumped into the civilized cities and started, borrowing everything.
They were just copying Sumerian and Akkadian homework.
Pretty much. Barton used biblical references, early cuneiform texts, and he took some Sumerian texts, like one translated by Chiara, very literally.
The ones that made them sound uncouth, ignorant of farming, culturally backward.
Right. And that flattened their whole identity into this negative stereotype. It basically said they brought nothing original to the table, just absorbed Mesopotamian culture.
It's a classic way to dismiss a group that challenges the status quo, isn't it? Label them barbarians.
It is. But thankfully, the picture started to change.
How so? What shifted the perspective?
Well, a big part was advances in archaeology, especially from the mid-20th century onwards. More systematic surveys, excavations across Syria, Mesopotamia, the Levant.
Digging deeper, literally.
Exactly. And the material evidence, settlement patterns, architecture, burial customs, it just didn't fit the sudden invasion story.
So the stuff they found suggested something more complex.
Much more. It pointed towards a more integrated, longer-term presence. Not a simple replacement, but interaction, maybe even integration over time.
And what about language? Did that play a role?
Hugely. Scholars started looking beyond just, say, biblical Hebrew or standard Akkadian. They dug into administrative archives.
The day-to-day records?
Right, looking for Amorite personal names, specific dialect features, and this linguistic evidence also pointed away from them being just sudden outsiders.
It suggested they were part of the scene for longer.
Exactly. Involved in long-term interactions,
Yeah.
cultural exchange, not just a wave crashing on the shore.
Okay, so archaeology and linguistics started chipping away at the old view. Where does that bring us now? This is where it gets really interesting, right?
This is where modern scholarship really shines. Building on that foundation, we get a much more dynamic picture. Aaron Burke's concept of the Amorite koine is central here.
Koine. Koine. That means common in Greek.
Yeah, like a common language. But Burke uses it to mean a shared cultural and political sphere. Think of it less like a single empire, more like a network.
A network connecting different Amorite kingdoms.
Precisely. linked by shared court practices, similar legal ideas, diplomatic habits, spanning across various Amorite-ruled states.
So Amorite in this sense isn't just an ethnic label, like Sumerian.
It might be more flexible than that. Burke suggests it could function as a marker of participation in this elite transregional network, a shared way of doing politics and expressing power.
Interesting. And how does Rience de Boer's work fit in? You mentioned his microhistory.
De Boer complements Burke's broad view by zooming right in. He looks at northern Babylonia, the Diyala region, between about 2004 and 1815 BCE.
Getting down to the details.
Exactly. The granular mechanics, as he calls it. How did their power actually take root? He traces tribal structures, alliance building, economic strategies in specific places.
So shifting from big labels to actual actions on the ground.
Right. It focuses on their strategic choices, not just cultural descriptions.
But even with all this new insight, there are still debates, right? It's not all solved.
Oh, definitely not. Big questions remain. Was Amorite primarily how they saw themselves? Or a label others put on them, maybe negatively at first, or really just shorthand for being part of this coin?
And their origins still argued about. Outsiders migrating in or locals who rose to prominence.
Exactly. Were they fundamentally migrants, or were they people already on the fringes whose influence grew under the right circumstances? That's still debated.
And we always have to be careful about the sources themselves, the biases.
Absolutely. Those hostile Sumerian descriptions versus, say, administrative lists or archaeological finds, you have to weigh them differently.
And the time frame. Can we really lump everyone from 2500 to 1500 BCE under the single label Amorite? 1,000 years is a long time.
That's another challenge. Maybe we need finer distinctions between different periods or phases of their history.
So this whole evolution and understanding really shows how important it is to use all the evidence and constantly question our assumptions, both ancient and modern ones.
Precisely. It forces us to see the Amorites not as static figures, but as dynamic, adaptable people who actively shape their world through political and cultural innovation.
Okay, let's rewind a bit then to their earliest days. Where did they come from? You mentioned the steppe.
Right, that liminal zone, that border area between the irrigated cities of southern Mesopotamia and the big, open, semi-dry lands of the Syrian steppe.
Not just a line on a map, but a zone of interaction.
Constant interaction. And tension, too. You had the mobile pastoralists, like the early Amorites, moving with the seasons, and the settled farmers tied to their fields and irrigation, different rhythms of life colliding.
And Burke argues their mobility wasn't backwardness, but a smart strategy.
Exactly. A rational adaptation, he calls it. It made sense in an environment where rain and good grazing weren't guaranteed year-round. It wasn't primitive, it was practical.
And being mobile gave them advantages.
Definitely. Control over water sources, pastures, and maybe most importantly, caravan routes. That gave them wealth, but also strategic leverage.
Connecting them to the bigger trade networks.
Yes, linking Syria, Mesopotamia, even Anatolia. This position on the edge, mastering that frontier zone, really set them up for future influence. It wasn't marginal, it was pivotal.
When did we first see them mentioned in writing?
The earliest clear mentions pop up in the late 3rd millennium BCE. In Sumerian texts, they're often called Martu.
Martu, M-A-R-T-U.
Right. And in Akkadian sources, they're Amuru.
Amuru, okay. And where do these names appear?
Usually in things like royal inscriptions or administrative records, often in contexts related to raids or hiring them as mercenaries or dealing with them diplomatically on the frontier.
So they were already a factor, a presence to be reckoned with.
Clearly. Sometimes a threat, sometimes useful allies or soldiers for hire.
But then you have those other texts, the literary ones.
Yes, like the marriage of Martu. These painted a very different picture. More of a caricature, really.
Making them out to be rough nomads, bad manners, didn't know how to farm.
Exactly. Culturally alien from the sophisticated urban perspective. And Barton, back in the early 20th century, kind of took these literary stereotypes at face value.
Seeing them as genuinely barbarous mountaineers who only became civilized later.
Pretty much. That was his interpretation, based heavily on those biased literary sources.
But Burke offers a counter-argument.
A very strong one. He argues these negative portrayals tell us more about the anxieties of the city elites than about the Amorites themselves.
Anxieties about these mobile groups gaining power on their borders.
Precisely. It becomes a political tool, a way to delegitimize rivals whose influence was growing out there on the periphery. It's propaganda, not ethnography.
So, looking past the stereotypes, how were they actually organized back then, before the big dynasties?
In that early pre-dynastic phase, their society seems to have been based on tribal networks, kinship alliances. Leadership likely rested with chiefs or elders.
And these leaders had authority over both the mobile herders and any more settled communities they had.
It seems so. And they clearly developed a reputation as skilled fighters, able to pull together significant military forces when needed.
Which made them useful mercenaries, but also dangerous raiders.
Exactly that duality. De Boer's work on the Diyala region shows this clearly. Amorite groups were sometimes hired by city-states as auxiliary troops.
So they learned Mesopotamian military tactics firsthand.
Right. But other times, they conducted raids partly for resources, partly maybe as political pressure. This dual role gave them invaluable experience with urban systems, both military and political.
It wasn't just fighting, though. You mentioned trade earlier.
Crucial point. The relationship wasn't purely hostile. There was trade, livestock, wool, leather, maybe metals, bridging the gap between the pastoralists and the city merchants.
And intermarriage. Was that a factor?
Yes, definitely. Strategic marriages with city elites could give Amorite leaders important insider connections, footholds within the established political structures.
A way to gain influence from within.
Absolutely. And De Boer's work, again, in the Diyala region, really highlights this. He shows how settlements on the edge, initially maybe small Amorite outposts, gradually became centers of power.
He calls it a soft conquest model.
Yeah, it's a great term. It suggests Amorite leaders built up influence and authority steadily over time, long before they actually claimed kingship openly. It wasn't a sudden grab for power.
More like a slow burn, a strategic positioning.
Exactly.
Yep.
So by the time the second millennium BCE dawned, that mobility, once seen as marginal, had become a real strategic asset. They knew how to operate in multiple worlds, across different landscapes, which perfectly positioned them for the next big step. Kingship.
And that next big step happened in a very particular context, right? The political landscape shifted dramatically.
It really did. The key event was the collapse of the Third Dynasty around 2004 BCE. This was a big, centralized Sumerian empire that had controlled Mesopotamia.
And its collapse left a power vacuum.
A huge one. Suddenly you have this fragmented world of competing city-states, Mari, Eshnunna, Isin, Larsa, Babylon, all vying for dominance.
A perfect storm of opportunity for a group like the Amorites.
Absolutely. Their mix of fighting skills, diplomatic know-how, and that frontier adaptability gave them a real edge in this scramble for resources, trade routes, and power.
De Boer points out this instability created unprecedented opportunities for them.
He does, especially for those tribal leaders who are already well-positioned and, crucially, already familiar with Mesopotamian politics and warfare from their previous interactions, like mercenary service.
So they knew the system they were aiming to take over.
In many ways, yes. They weren't complete outsiders in that sense.
How did they actually make the jump to kingship? Was there one single path?
Not really one single path, but common patterns emerge. Some leaders definitely rose through military means.
Like Sumo in Babylon.
Good example. He seems to have seized control during a crisis, founding the first dynasty of Babylon around 1894 BCE. Military strongmen capitalizing on instability.
But others used different strategies.
Yes, others relied more on careful alliance building, diplomatic marriages, to connect with established elites, securing trade deals that benefited the cities they courted, gaining legitimacy more gradually.
But once they got the throne, they didn't just rule like tribal chiefs.
No, and this is critical. They adapted very quickly to the existing Mesopotamian models of kingship.
Adopting the titles, the building projects, sponsoring temples, all the symbols of legitimate Mesopotamian rule.
Exactly. Commissioning big temples, city walls, taking on royal titles, patronizing the traditional gods. Barton, even with his biases, recognized this was essential.
Why essential? To win over the locals.
Precisely. To gain the acceptance of the urban populations who might otherwise see them as foreign conquerors. It was a smart way to legitimize their rule, to blend in while taking charge.
Let's look at some examples. Babylon under Hammurabi is the big one, right?
Absolutely the most famous. Hammurabi, reigning 1792-1750 BCE, represents the peak. His law code is legendary.
More than just laws, though.
Oh, yes. It shows the political centralization they achieved, but also the ideological sophistication. He presented himself as a king of justice, chosen by the gods. It was a masterful blend of conquest, law, and religious backing.
What about other centers? Mari, for instance.
Mari, under Zimri-Lem around 1775-1761 BCE, gives us a fantastic window into the diplomatic side. The archives there are incredible.
Full of letters and treaties.
Thousands of them, documenting treaties, royal marriages, gift exchanges. It really shows the mechanisms of how these Amorite states interacted within that shared koine.
And further north, Yamḥad.
Centered on Aleppo, Yamḥad was a major power, controlling key trade routes between Anatolia and Mesopotamia. Their authority was also boosted by the prestige of their main god, the storm god Hadad.
Religion playing a political role, too.
Definitely. And down in Eshnunna, Debor shows how they extended their influence into the Diyala region through expansion and careful administration, really integrating that area.
So this Amorite coin you mentioned, it really was a shared culture of how to rule.
That's Burke's argument, and the evidence supports it. Across these kingdoms, you see similar approaches to law, similar court rituals, common diplomatic language.
Even names and titles spreading around.
Yes, personal names, royal titles, even architectural styles seem to circulate, creating this common political language that worked even when they were fighting each other. It set the rules of the game.
It sounds like they had to perform a tricky balancing act, though.
Extremely tricky. This is a key point, balancing two sources of legitimacy.
Their tribal roots and the expectations of the cities.
Exactly. They needed their tribal kin for loyalty and military muscle, their original power base from the steppe, but they also needed the support of the settled urban populations.
Which meant mastering city administration, sponsoring temples, upholding traditions.
Right. And Debor stresses this needed constant negotiation. The priorities of your nomadic allies might be very different from your urban subjects. Keeping both happy was a challenge.
But they managed it for quite a while.
They did for generations. This balancing act, though difficult, allowed them to reshape the whole political map of the Near East, and it created a model for later dynasties who also came from outside the established centers.
This idea of the Amorite coin seems really central to understanding their impact beyond just conquest. Can we flesh that out a bit more?
Absolutely. It's Burke's core concept.
Ah.
Again, not a rigid empire, but this shared sphere, political, cultural linking kingdoms like Babylon, Mari, Yamḥad, Eshnunna.
Bound together by common ways of doing things.
Exactly. Common diplomatic practices, legal ideas, even shared religious elements. It provided a framework, a common language, that helped them interact, compete, and cooperate. It smoothed communication and reinforced that elite identity across borders.
How did that work in practice, on the ground in government?
Well, administratively, you see similar models popping up. Hammurabi's code, while exceptional, fits into a broader legal tradition shared among Amorite rulers. It wasn't totally out of the blue.
And other administrative tools were shared too.
Yes, Debor points to tablets from Mari and Eshnunna, showing parallel systems for things like taxation, organizing state labor, the corvée system, and managing provinces, a kind of shared administrative toolkit.
And diplomacy. You mentioned the Mari archives.
A goldmine. They show standardized ways of writing treaties, exchanging official gifts, addressing other rulers. These conventions made negotiations more predictable, formalized alliances even when tensions were high, like having international protocols.
What about religion? Was that part of the coin too?
It was another unifying thread, yes. While rulers patronized local gods for local support, certain deities had wider appeal.
Like Hadad, the storm god.
He's the key example. His cult, centered at Yamḥad, had religious and diplomatic importance. Exchanging sacred items related to Hadad could cement political ties.
Barton saw their adoption of Mesopotamian gods like Shamash and Ishtar as just assimilation, right? Them becoming Mesopotamian.
That was the older view. But now scholars see it more as strategic syncretism blending traditions.
How so? What was the strategy?
It helped them legitimize their rule in the cities by honoring local gods while maintaining links to their own Amorite identity through figures like Hadad. It was about bridging worlds, not just erasing their background.
Did this shared culture extend to physical things? Art? Architecture?
Definitely. Palace architecture is a great example. Across Babylon, Mari, Aleppo, you see similar features: grand gateways, column halls, specific layouts for administrative areas.
Suggesting shared architects, or at least shared blueprints.
Probably both. Emulation of prestigious styles, too. And beyond buildings, things like cylinder seals, the glyptic art, luxury items, even pottery styles traveled along the same trade routes as grain and metal.
So the coin was economic as well as political.
Burke makes that point strongly. It was a commercial network, too, allowing merchants and artisans to operate across borders with some shared expectations and protections.
But it wasn't like they were all identical culturally. You emphasized that before.
Crucial distinction. The coin wasn't a steamroller flattening local differences. Each kingdom kept its own dialect, local festivals, historical traditions.
So successful rulers had to be adaptable.
Hugely. They had to balance the prestige of being part of this wider Amorite elite culture with respecting local ways. That was key to keeping both their tribal supporters and their city subjects loyal.
And if they got the balance wrong?
Resistance could flare up. It shows how delicate that equilibrium was.
What about the long-term impact of this coin? Did it outlast the Amorite kingdoms themselves?
In many ways, yes. Its influence extended far beyond the lifespan of the dynasties that created it.
How?
The diplomatic language, the treaty formats, the legal principles, even some artistic motifs, these things persisted. They were picked up and adapted by the Hurrians and Kassites who came after.
And even influenced later groups like the Arameans and Assyrians?
Indeed. So the coin wasn't just a temporary result of Amorite power, it was one of their most lasting legacies, a kind of cultural infrastructure that shaped Near Eastern politics for centuries.
But that power, the direct political dominance, it didn't last forever. Like all empires or powerful eras, it faced challenges.
Inevitably, the Amorite ascendancy was transformative, but it became vulnerable. Internally, things started to fray after Hammurabi's death in 1750 BCE.
His successors weren't as strong.
Apparently not. That careful balance de Boer talks about between tribal loyalty and city administration, it needed constant skill to maintain. Without Hammurabi's kind of leadership, things started to weaken.
What kind of internal problems?
Succession disputes in Babylon, local rebellions chipping away at central authority. In places like Mary and Yamḥad, rivalries between dynasties seemed to escalate. The overall unity of the coin fractured, leaving kingdoms more isolated.
And vulnerable to threats from outside.
Exactly. And new powerful players were emerging on the scene. In Syria, you had the rise of the Hurrian-Mitanni Confederation, which grew strong, often at Yamḥad's expense.
And Egypt got involved too.
Yes, under pharaohs like Thutmose III in the mid-15th century BCE, Egypt campaigned actively in the Levant, shaking up the political map and disrupting trade routes that the Amorite states relied on.
But the biggest blow came from?
The Hittites from Anatolia. King Rusili I led this famous, devastating raid that sacked Babylon around 1595 BCE.
Did the Hittites stay and rule Babylon?
No, it was more of a hit and run, but it was catastrophic. It weakened Babylon so much that it paved the way for another group, the Kassites, to take over. And that, as Burke notes, really marks the end of Amorite political rule in southern Mesopotamia.
So the political power faded. Did their culture just disappear?
No, and this is fascinating. It wasn't like flipping a switch off. It was more of a transformation, a cultural blending.
The coin eroded, the trade networks broke down, diplomatic ways changed.
Yes, all that happened as political power shifted. The protocols of the Kassite or Hurrian courts replaced the old Amorite ones.
But the Amorites themselves, the people.
Burke argues that Amorite elites were often absorbed into the new regimes. They didn't just vanish. They brought their skills with them.
Their administrative experience, legal knowledge.
Exactly. Their expertise in administration, the legal traditions based on codes like Hammurabi's, even their religious syncretism, these things became part of the successor states. Their influence continued, just woven into a new fabric.
So their legacy lived on even after their kingdoms fell. Where can we see traces of that?
Several key areas. Legally, codes inspired by Hammurabi's continue to be used and adapted in Kassite Babylon and elsewhere. The principles endured.
Linguistically.
Amorite personal names kept appearing in text for generations, suggesting that West Semitic ancestry still held prestige.
And religion. What happened to Hadad?
Hadad remained important. He often got incorporated into the pantheons of the successor states, sometimes merged with Mesopotamian gods like Hadad or the Hurrian storm god Teshub. It shows that religious adaptability again.
So, where Barton saw this as the Amorites civilizing others, we now see it more as integration.
Yes, modern scholarship emphasizes the syncretism, the two-way street, rather than just a one-way civilizing influence. It's more complex than that.
So looking back, the Amorite period seems like a really crucial transition point.
Absolutely. A bridge between the older Sumerian Akkadian world of the early Bronze Age and the more complex international systems of the late Bronze Age.
Their innovations in diplomacy, law, culture, they left a lasting mark.
An indelible mark. Their decline wasn't an end, but a transformation.
Right.
Their power shifted from direct rule to this embedded legacy, shaping Near Eastern statecraft for centuries.
Oh, okay, so let's try to pull this all together. What's the big takeaway for us looking back across millennia?
Well, we've traced this incredible journey, haven't we? From mobile groups on the steppe
to becoming these powerful dynastic rulers, lawgivers, cultural brokers, right across the Near East.
And we've seen their rise wasn't just military force, but this amazing capacity for integration, taking urban traditions but blending them with their own unique background.
Yeah.
Masters of cultural fusion, as you put it.
And that Amorite coin, the shared sphere they created for politics, law, diplomacy, its influence really outlasted their own kingdoms.
Definitely. Which leads to this interesting paradox, doesn't it?
Their political dominance faded, but their influence didn't. It achieved a kind of historical immortality.
Exactly. And it really challenges us to think about what historical significance means. Is it just about how long your empire lasted?
Or is it about the deeper impact, the ideas and systems you leave behind?
Precisely. The Amorite story suggests maybe their greatest triumph wasn't the territory they controlled, but the systems they helped build.
The legal frameworks, the diplomatic practices, the shared cultural understanding.
Mm.
The connective tissue, as you called it.
Yes. That connective tissue shaped civilizations long after the name Amorite stopped commanding armies. Their legacy hints that maybe the most enduring impacts aren't always the loudest or most visible.
But the ones quietly woven into the fabric of society itself.
That's a great way to put it. They influence what comes next long after the original weavers are gone. It reminds us history is more than just kings and battles. It's about these deep, subtle currents of cultural transmission and evolution.